on Siman Nun Aleph in the Hebrew edition, and page 114 in the bilingual edition, if you'd like to follow along. So just to recap, because we missed last week due to a COVID scare. Everyone's okay, I hope? Right? Everyone tested negative, everyone has their proof of vaccination cards?
Yeah, still very nervous.
Yeah, remember, for this year, everyone has to bring in their proof of vaccination cards. Or you have to be tested, you have to bring in your negative test. Okay, we're very strict here at the Jewish Learning Center. All right.
Check for mental capacity.
That we don't check for. just vaccination cards. All right. So what we've been discussing the past few weeks is the two hanhagas of Hashem, the two ways that Hashem runs the world, two midos that He uses. There's something called the midah of schar ve'onesh, reward and punishment, which we are very familiar with. A person has to believe that he gets rewarded for his positive actions and punished for his negative actions. We all are aware that we don't want to sin, God forbid, because we'll get punished, and we want to do mitzvahs because we'll get rewarded. This is a very basic thing that we've all been brought up with, and we all know very well. Now, there's another hanhaga that many of us are less familiar with, which is the hanhagas hayichud, or memshala, that Hashem constantly behind the scenes is directing the world to its final tachlis, to its final conclusion. That the world has a goal, which we discussed, is that Mashiach will come, and the world will recognize that God is one, and that He is the only power that is in control. And after that, there'll be Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, and then this world will be transformed into Olam Haba, the world to come, as the Ramchal tells us. So this Hanhagas Hayichud, or Memshala, however you want to say it, that is something that is constantly operating. God is doing behind the scenes to push the world to its final conclusion. So when one looks at the world and says, this event that happened, that doesn't seem to fit in with the reward and punishment. For example, Abraham said, how do I know that my children will inherit the land? And seemingly that's a very minor error that Abraham Avinu made. But because of that minor error, which usually if we just had the Hanhaga of Mishpat, wouldn't have been punished so severely. But since there's Hanhagas HaYichud, that for the conclusion, for the purpose of the world, there needs to be a Jewish people that is formed, that goes through the leaving of Egypt. So because of what Avraham Avinu said, by saying, how do I know my children will inherit the land? They were enslaved in Egypt because it was necessary that enslavement, that they had to be an exodus with all of the miracles, and that the Jewish people received the Torah, because through the Jewish people, the world will come to its final conclusion. And that's what we mean when we say the Jewish people are the chosen people. And we also learned that we don't know now, as looking around, seeing events that happen, it's very difficult to explain. It's not impossible to explain why certain events happen. It doesn't seem to fit. Why do certain righteous people suffer and certain calamities happen? But after Mashiach comes, it's going to be a history lesson where we're going to look and we'll see retroactively why each event needed to happen for the world to reach its final conclusion. We're going to understand why there had to be a Holocaust. We're going to understand why there had to be Corona, why there had to be a Soviet Union, why all of these things had to happen, and how it all fits in. I mean, we can hypothesize and make assumptions and see what happened, what came out of these things. For example, Corona, you could look through it and say humanity really realized that they have no power. There's things like that a small little virus could make the whole entire world shut down, and people realize that because human beings tend to think that we're in control and we can run everything. We predict the weather because it gives us a semblance that we're in control even of the weather. Oh yeah, we knew that was going to happen. We're the ones that are really in control. But the whole purpose of everything is for God to show us that He's the one in control, and that's it. He's one, He's in control, we're not in control. But now, as we know, the world doesn't look like that. People think that they're in control, there's evil in the world, people go against Hashem, but Hashem is constantly pushing the world to reach its final conclusion, where He will be the one everyone will realize that He's the one that is in control. So now we're going to continue with that idea, and the Ramchal is going to clarify a point. Amra HaNeshama, says the Neshama, I still need some clarification on some issues of this Midah Memshala, this Midah Hayichud of Hashem directing the world, like you mentioned. I don't understand, or it's impossible to understand Hashem's perfection, Hashem's true perfection. So what the Ramchal is asking here, what the Neshama is asking the Seichel, is that you telling me that eventually the world is being pushed to its final conclusion, where the Midas HaMemshala, where Hashem is going to demonstrate the world that He's the one in control, and the world will be perfected. Right? That's the world will reach Shleimus, perfection, because now we're in a world that's incomplete. But after Mashiach comes and after Tchias HaMesim, the world will be perfected. But he says, how could that be? Because you've mentioned to us, the Ramchal said, or the Seichel told the Neshama already, that when we talk about Hashem being Shalem, being complete, he says it's impossible for a human being to understand that. It's impossible for us as creations to understand what does it mean that God is perfect. We know it's true, we believe it, but we don't understand it. It's impossible for us to grasp anything really about the perfection of God, to know about what's called Atzmius. We know how God relates to us, but when describing God Himself, as the Ramchal had a long discourse on this in the beginning, we don't know anything. So how can you tell me that God is pushing the world to completeness when it comes out that we don't understand anything about God? How does that work? That is what the Neshama is asking the Seichel. It's clear? Very philosophical. But good. All right, so let's see the answer. Amar Seichel, says the Seichel, Heitafta l'daktig, you're asking a very good question. V'ata midech al buryam shel dvarim. Now I'm going to explain it to you very clearly. Shleimusa yizbarach hapashit I efshar lahasigo klal ve'ikr. God's perfection, when it comes to Him, is impossible for us to understand at all. This is the ultimate perfection that we don't know anything about. It is impossible. It's above the comprehension of any created being. So don't think that you'll study in yeshiva for 50 years and you'll be able to understand the perfection of God. Nobody, no created being can understand it. I wonder, even, it sounds like, I'm just suggesting here, maybe even the angels, because the angels are also created beings. Sounds like any created being can't understand the true perfection of God, which is really high up there. When God created the world, when He wanted to create the world, He brought into being He set up certain attributes that He deals with the world. And these attributes that He deals with are not according to Him, but rather according to us. We'll explain what that means. And it comes out that Hashem's simple existence is totally separate from anything. I don't say separate. It's removed. Okay, removed. It's removed from these attributes or these things. So meaning God created the world and He deals with the world with certain attributes, but God's actual existence is not what we're talking about here. He's going to explain more. Meaning, even when God created creations, how He could have created them, He held back, and He didn't create them as He could have. Adrab, on the contrary, He suppressed His goodness. God could have created the world perfect and with all goodness, but He held His goodness back when He created the world. Even I think it's easier if I just read it and then summarize. The So it's like this. God created the world, and He didn't create it according to relating to Him, according to His own perfection. Because that is something that creations can't understand at all. Rather, He created a world. There are certain attributes that God deals with the world, and within those attributes He could have created the world in two ways. According to the creations, from mitzad, the created beings, He could have made them perfect and all good. That means there would be a world with no evil, with no war, with no fighting. Everything will be perfect. He could have created the world like that. Now that perfection, that is not God's perfection. Even from that, God's perfection is totally not understandable and cannot be comprehended by even those creations. But rather, God created the world not according to His perfection and not according to our perfection, but rather He created it with chesronos, with deficiencies. That's why we have now evil in the world and we have horrible things that could happen. But the idea is that we're going to reach the final conclusion where we reach perfection. Now, which perfection are we going to reach? We're going to reach the second level, the perfection that corresponds to us, where there's peace in the world and no more evil and things like that. That happens la'aseh love in the world to come. But when it comes to God's perfection, we're never going to reach that. That's something that's totally separate from us. When God created the world, He created it according to the creations, not according to Himself. Okay, let's continue. Is that clear? A little good? Okay. V'amnam. Lo ratzal kol panim lahaniach olam hakach. But God created the world with deficiencies, but He didn't want to leave it like that. He didn't want the world to constantly be in a state of deficiency. The world would constantly be going in this he had a good word, volatile and unstable situation because of good and evil. Rather, because of Hashem's goodness, He put into creation a hanhaga, a way that He deals with the world that's very deep, that causes all things to happen from the good and evil that He created to bring it to its final perfection. So God created a world with good and evil that's totally imperfect, but within that world that's imperfect that He created, He put in a hanhaga, a way that He deals with the world that will ensure that the world will not remain like that forever. It will ensure that the good and evil will not always remain in the world, but rather it's going towards a final conclusion where there will only be good in the world. So even though God didn't create the world perfect, within the deficient world that He created, He put in like a mechanism, really it's not more than a mechanism, it's Him directing it, that it will eventually, evil will be destroyed and the world will be all good and perfect. But the perfection that we're getting is according to our point of view, not according to God's point of view. At the end of the day, His deeds will be perfected, and they won't remain with their deficiencies. Like we said, this is not, when we say the world will be perfect, this is not God's perfection that we're talking about, mitzad Him. Because God's simpleness and His perfection is not something that we can understand at all. It's like what I mentioned. That God is making the world according to us, according to His creations, but He didn't even make it according to our perfection. It's a very deep way that Hashem runs the world. That will bring everything about to the final perfection. Let's just do one more paragraph, because then we're finishing up with this oath, the simon, whatever you call them. Hashem, so to say, suppressed His mercy and created the world, like we said, with deficiencies. At the beginning it was deficient, but in the end it will be perfect because of His goodness. Like we explained, had Hashem created the world with just the attribute of justice, because remember we were talking about before, there's two attributes God uses to run the world. One is the attribute of justice, and one is this midah of yichud that we're talking about, where Hashem's directing the world to its final conclusion. Had God only created the world with this attribute of justice, the world would constantly be in the state as it is in now. You would have good and evil, and it would go on like that for eternity. You'd always have good people and evil people. Tovos v'ros, good and evil. Bracha u'klala, blessing and curses. But now, even though God created the world initially like that, meaning that's the stage we find ourselves now, it's not going to be like that forever. So God has this midah of mishpat in the open, the attribute of justice in the open. That's something we're all aware of. But behind the scenes, He's operating behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, God is operating, pulling the strings to make the world come to its final conclusion, where there will only be good, perfection, according to us, not according to Him, and the entire world will realize that there is one God who is in control. So that's the idea we've been talking about the past couple of weeks. The issue now that the Neshama is clarifying is when you say that the world is coming to its final tikkun, it's coming to its final perfection. How could that be? Because we can't understand the perfection of Hashem. So the Seichel answers, we were never talking about reaching the perfection of God, because that's something we can't even understand. We're talking about reaching the perfection in this world, which is where there's all good and no evil, and everyone recognizes the goodness of Hashem. Very deep stuff, but it's very fundamental to, how does God operate the world? That's what we're learning here. It's very, very fundamental stuff.